Genesis readers chapter 3, the fall. Now the serpent, and notice this, right? So, how many times have we read about the fall, right? It's Satan, it's the devil, but in the text, it's a serpent, a beast of the field. This is really important. In the fall, our arch enemy is presented as just an animal. Now, sure, maybe a crafty one, but an animal. And what had we seen earlier in Genesis 1 and 2? That mankind, man and woman, were meant to rule over everything on earth, have dominion over it. And here we see that what mankind has done is let a serpent get the better of him. Let something that he was designed to rule get the better of him. Even if it is Satan or the devil, the way Genesis is presenting it as like Paul would say in 1 Corinthians, God has given you an escape. Not even Satan himself, not even a devil, not even a power. Because here, instead of presenting some horrible, impossible, demonic foe, we're instead presenting with something that could have been overcome and wasn't. Now, that's more commonly the fate of humanity, isn't it? I mean, okay, Satan's in the world, sure. You get attacked by Satan, sure. But let's be honest. What is it that most of the time causes you to sin and causes you to fall? It's something that you should have gotten control over and you couldn't. Moving on. The serpent was more crafty. This word in Hebrew, arum. Take note of this because we're going to see in a second where that comes back. Now, he starts in to the woman, just starts with a question. He just starts the woman thinking, what did God really say? And did he mean it? And the woman says to the serpent, well, we can eat all kinds of things, but he did say you shouldn't eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it. Okay, this is a major problem. God never said that. So it started with a question, questioning what exactly is the command of God. Let's talk about that. Maybe we got a little wiggle room here. It went from a question to confusion. Lest you die. Well, now the serpent has already got her. The serpent says to the woman, you will not die. Well, and this is important. In a way, he's right. Will she die literally? She won't actually die literally, at least not right away. If she eats from this fruit, we all know that Adam and Eve didn't die right away. So what happened? Well, death in the scriptures is presented literally. That's true. But there is another type of death in the scripture. Division. And we had seen this in chapters 1 and chapter 2, where God was looking for, although he had separation, he was looking for union. The man needed a woman. Plants were bearing their own seed. The day needs a sun. The night needs a moon. Death is literal, and death is also division. This one will happen immediately. Not this one. The serpent is right there. But this happens immediately. Not following God leads to division. Division between God, between our families, between each other. Well, again, he presents it in this really benign, sort of harmless way. Hey, you're just looking for wisdom? You're just trying to figure out what's right and wrong? Trying to figure out what's right and wrong? Isn't that a good pursuit? Shouldn't you try and figure out what's good and evil? And again, that's where the serpent, the thing you should have ruled, has got you. No, that really wasn't your business. You were to focus on God, on being obedient. Well, she sees that the tree is good for food. It's obviously a really pretty tree, really pretty fruit, and the deception of wisdom here, of wanting to know what's good and right. What should I do? What should I not do? Well, yeah, that wasn't our province, though. We weren't supposed to decide the ins and outs of everything we should and should not do. That was to be left to God. Well, and look at us now. How has humanity been doing trying to figure out the difference between what's right and what's wrong? How has that been going for us? Well, and here's the main problem with this thing. Anyone can decide this, right? One group can decide A is wrong, and another group decides, well, no, A is right. One group can decide B is wrong, and then the other group said, no, B is right. And then what do you have? Well, then you got fighting. And then we get back here to division. The eyes were both were opened, and they knew they were naked. Arum. Where did you see that? The author of Genesis was hinting here that this whole interaction with the serpent, crafty Arum, was going to go south really quickly. Naked Arum. Different word, similar pronunciation. They sewed fig leaves together, made themselves loincloths. Why? Well, here's the pattern that you have. Sin leads to shame. Shame leads to hiding. And we could add some more steps here. When you're shamed or you're hiding, you also feel vulnerable. You want protection. You want protection from the people around you that you once trusted. And you need a covering from other people. So it was sin that gave birth to shame. And shame makes you hide and feel vulnerable. So they, of course, hid themselves from the presence of God among trees of the garden. God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" Now, we will see a repeat of this type of situation if you look in Exodus 12. In Exodus 12, God called out to the Israelites from Sinai, and the people, being stubborn, rebellious, ran from him. Well, so the writer of Genesis is saying this is a repeat experience we have with God. And this one here is the primordial one. When we hear the voice of God, what we initially do is run. Well, I was naked, and so I hid myself. This theme then of shame is pervading all of these verses. Shame is causing us to hide because we know we've sinned, just like children. So look here. See, the whole fall, it's not an act of evil genius. What was it? It was just folly. It was just something stupid. And again, most of the sins that you commit, are they some sort of acts of diabolical evilness? No, they're not. Most of the acts are just stupid. They're just folly. They're things you could have stopped and you didn't. They're just like getting beat by a serpent. Most of the stuff we do, we just let sin overtake us. The Lord said to the serpent, and here he starts to give oracles of cursing, and yet hope sown in here. Scholars have referred to this line of verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, your offspring, her offspring, as the Protoevangelium, or this is it's a Latin phrase, also known as this is the first gospel. So though we had sinned, and we're now about to fall under the condemnation of sin, be exiled from the garden, fall under curse, even still, no matter how bad things get, and let's say they've never gotten worse than humanity screwing up paradise. Things in the world can look bad all the time. Well, they never looked worse than they did here in Genesis 3. Never looked worse. And yet, despite how bad this looks, what do we have? Hope. Hope sown into the worst possible situation anybody could have imagined. To the woman, I will multiply your pain in childbearing. Now, initially in Genesis 1 and 2, blessing was tied to multiplication, right? I will bless you. And he said, have dominion and multiply. So the blessing was tied to multiplying and having dominion. Now, suffering leads to the blessing. So we are still to multiply, have dominion, care for creation, care for each other. But this, instead of the blessing just allowing us to care for each other, have dominion, multiply, now as we go about our jobs of multiplying, having families, taking care of society and our neighbors, it involves inherently pain in childbirth, suffering, which is not, though, in vain. It leads back to the blessing. Same with Adam. He was supposed to care for creation, for his neighbors, for his family. And what do we see? Cursed is the ground because of you. So also same for Adam, though. The blessing will come through suffering. So this is a hard word, but it's not in vain. As we do this, as we suffer, the blessing emerges. As we suffer, the blessing emerges. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. You are dust, to dust you shall return. As we come to the end of this, you see God made for Adam and his wife garments of skin and clothed them. Figs, leaves were insufficient to cover sin and shame. Figs cannot cover sin and shame. A covering for sin, as we've seen this thread now beginning to emerge in Genesis 3, requires suffering. So, God took an innocent animal, an animal that hadn't done anything to deserve this, and God kills this animal, skins it, and clothes the two sinners. An innocent suffering for the guilty. I'm sure you've seen this theme before, haven't you? Well, he drives the man out and the woman out at the east end of the Garden of Eden. He placed a cherubim, a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the tree of life. So, kicked out, but how back? How back in the garden? Remember I had said about Genesis 2, the Garden of Eden represents the temple. So, as the Garden of Eden, so we said the garden was in Eden. If this is the garden, this was Eden. If this was Eden here, this is the garden in Eden. So likewise, which was at the east side of Eden. At the east side of Eden was the garden. Likewise, so the temple, north, south, east, west. The entrance to the temple was on the east. And inside the temple, above the Ark of the Covenant, there were angels. And carved into curtains and fabric and the doors of the temple, there was images of fruit like pomegranates and vines, grapevines, pomegranates, trees. So what does this all remind you of? The Garden of Eden. So how back, let's come back here. How back into the Garden of Eden? Obedience to God. That's how you're going to get back in. How do you get back to the tree of life, which is here, which is where God is? Through the temple, which requires being part of the people of God, being obedient, into Eden, back to God, where the angels are. We'll stop here and move on to Genesis chapter 4. Take care.